What would you do if something chose you as its next meal, and the only thing on the menu was your sanity? Welcome to Smile, where an entity wants to drag you so deep into madness you won't even know it's real anymore. The good doctor is about to learn that a smile can be the single most terrifying thing a person will ever see. Rose is a dedicated psychiatrist working the night shift. But underneath all that competence, she's dragging around her own unresolved baggage, because as a kid she watched her mother OD next room, and she still gets nightmares about it. One day, a new emergency case rolls in. A grad student, mid-20s, dragged in by police after some kind of public meltdown. A few days earlier, she watched her own professor play Bob the Builder with his head, and now she's convinced whatever made him do that has followed her home. She says it can wear anyone's face, and the only constant is the disturbing smile, and it's already told her exactly how many days she's got left. Before we even get to what happens in that room, let's talk about how our good doctor doesn't give a damn about safety measures. A woman who was just forcibly dragged in mid-crisis ends up alone with a psychiatrist, no security agent, not even a nurse to help her. And my favorite, a vase, sitting right there on a side table within arm's reach of someone the hospital itself has decided might be a danger to herself. There's also something in her file that should have set off alarms immediately. 0 prior psychiatric history. Full breaks from reality almost always show up early in life, and she's 26 with a spotless record right up until a few days ago. That's the kind of anomaly that should get you an immediate toxicology screen before anyone slaps a psychiatric label on it. Rose tries to calm her down and understand what happened, but the girl panics again, like an invisible monster is about to get her. Then, all of a sudden, the panic drains from her face, replaced by that same wrong smile she'd described, and before Rose notices, the woman grabs a broken shard from that goddamn vase, the one that never should have been in the room, and uses it to vigorously scratch her neck. Two detectives take her statement afterward, and one of them turns out to be an ex of hers, who I like to call the simp cop. By the time the hospital finishes its paperwork, the whole thing's filed away as a tragic psychotic break. After heading home that night, the madness seems to follow her. After a hot bath and a relaxing glass of wine, she gets a vision of the dead girl standing frozen in the corner, looking like the Joker's long-lost daughter. But she's gone the second A train zooms in. While serving her cat dinner, she tells her fiancé she's had an absolute shitty day, but doesn't say a word about seeing the dead girl. After all, it was probably just stress and exhaustion. But even after that disaster of a day, the two of them still go out to meet up with Rose's sister and her idiot husband. That's where we learn two things. Big Sis is unbearable, and their late mother left behind a house Rose refuses to sell. Next morning, Simp Cop intercepts Rose at the front desk, clearly still carrying a torch. And yes, these two have history. After brushing off her ex, she goes to read the report on the professor's death, the same death witnessed by the patient who logged out the day before, and finds out he died smiling too. The smiling faces keep coming for her. First a vision of the girl who logged out the day before. Then that same smile shows up on another patient, and when the good doctor asks if he's okay, the guy snaps out of it and starts saying she's going to die, which sounds like a pretty direct death threat. Scared out of her mind, she calls in support staff to restrain him, only to realize the guy had actually been sleeping peacefully the entire time and gets woken up by nurses manhandling him. And that's already strike 3. From here on out, our dear doctor's mind is basically turning to jelly, because this entity isn't playing around. And thanks to that, her boss Kumar hands her a week off to cool down. Alright survivors, like I just said, this was already the third time our dear Rose had contact with the maniac smile the girl described. Once, sure, could be coincidence, could even be her mind playing tricks. But 3 times is a pattern, and at this point, she should have sat down and actually tried to investigate this somehow, whether by checking if she'd been exposed to some kind of hallucinogen, or by looking into exactly who was involved in whatever caused the poster girl's trauma in the first place, because honestly, both cases are way too specific to be a coincidence. Nobody hallucinates the exact same thing as someone else. That's incredibly personal, which is exactly why psychology has already proven that group hallucinations are basically a myth. So the odds of 2 people sharing the same delusion, especially 2 people who had maybe 5 minutes of contact and never even met before that, are next to impossible. The one thing the doctor shouldn't have done was go home telling herself it's just exhaustion, just stress. And that's exactly what she does. The right move here, hands down, would be subscribing to the channel. That way Rose would have gotten my acid and entertaining analysis, and it helped me hit 1,000 subscribers, which will definitely keep every evil entity far from you. She gets home sad, exhausted, and paranoid, pours another drink, and the house alarm goes off. She checks the doors, convinced someone's inside, and then gets a call from the monitoring center that feels way too much like a ghost face call right before he shows up to finish someone off. All of it just to snap back to reality, startled by an actual phone call. This time, the real monitoring center, meaning that's yet another hallucination added to the tab. Police sweep the house and find nothing. A train shows up asking why she earned the system before he even got home, and she lies to keep him from worrying, then goes looking for her missing cat. And whenever a pet goes missing in a horror movie, you know disaster's right around the corner. That night, Rose wakes from another nightmare about her mother, and listens back to the recording from the smiling girl's evaluation, picks out something calling her name right before the entity shows up right beside her, delivering an absolutely brutal jump scare that nearly knocked me out of my chair. She grabs a knife to defend herself, and A-Train comes running to find his desperate fiancé, waving the blade in every direction, trying to defend herself from something that isn't even there anymore. So Rose goes to see her childhood therapist and asks for medication to treat what she's convinced is a post-traumatic episode. Old Doc refuses, pointing out the sleep deprivation, the endless hours, and the fact Rose has never actually processed losing her mother and asks her to come in more often instead. So the poor woman decides to go to her nephew's birthday party anyway, practicing her best Joker smile in the mirror. When the boy opens his aunt's gift, he finds her cat's dead body inside. Rose lunges for the cat while everyone stares like she's lost it, spots the entity smiling at her, which makes her fall through a glass table. Now I could point out that Rose, being a doctor, could have prescribed herself some medication, except that doesn't really track, because we already know that what's destroying her mind is an outside entity, and no pill is going to fix that. Second, being in this state, completely psychologically wrecked, a party isn't the best place to be. She should have been resting somewhere with people who actually supports her, not her idiot sister. And third, let's be honest, the script dropped the ball a bit here, because that cat had been dead for roughly 2 days by that point, and a dead pet sealed inside gift wrap would absolutely be reeking by then, and even with her mind falling apart, she still should have noticed the smell and gone to check why that wrapping paper stank more than a French homeless. At the hospital, Kamar checks on her while she overhears Big Sis and A-Train arguing in the hallway. Once home, she finally tries to open up to her fiancé about the entity, and he can't bring himself to believe her, mentioning he did some reading and mental illness can run in families, and since her mother had similar issues, he figured she probably does too. Late that night, she's alone in her room while her spineless fiancé sleeps on the couch, because apparently modern men just need a lot of personal space when their girl is going through hell. She decides to look into the professor who finished himself off in front of the smiling girl, since he died with that exact same smile now shadowing Rose. The next day, she poses as a journalist to question the professor's widow and learns he was dealing with the exact same symptoms. His office walls are covered in drawings of smiling, twisted faces, proof he was actively tracing where this thing came from, all starting right after he witnessed a woman finish herself. But the second Rose starts putting the pattern together, she can't help herself and slips up, blowing her own cover. And the widow loses it when she finds out Rose isn't actually a journalist and throws her out of the house. Now, I could give you a whole beautiful speech here about how she could have fooled this woman more effectively. But honestly, Rose's mind is already going straight to hell at this point, which makes logical thinking pretty hard to pull off. Because all she had to do was show up as herself. She's a psychiatrist. She could have easily said there'd been similar cases, and she was now interested in looking into the husbands. Simple as that. But again, it's easy to talk from where we're sitting. If it were you, brain melting, unable to string a coherent thought together, you'd probably screw it up pretty badly too. Out of options, Rose visits the cop, who tracks down the name of the woman who finished herself in front of the professor. And it turns out that same person had also witnessed a guy finish himself before that, which is more than enough to catch the cop's attention, but Rose still isn't ready to share her theories with him. Back home, Rose finds out A-Train already called her own therapist behind her back and says he only wanted to help his clearly unhinged partner. Furious that he's running from the problem and betraying her trust, Rose walks out. And that's honestly the smartest thing Rose has done this entire movie, but don't get too excited because right after that, she's back to screwing everything up. She heads straight to her sister's house, which is the worst possible idea. She apologizes to Big Sis, tries to explain the curse, shows the evidence, and her sister tells her she's starting to look exactly like their mother, which makes Rose snap, and finally call her every name she's always wanted to, but always kept to herself. Trying to reason with family at this point is a complete waste of time. Everyone's already decided she's lost it. If she really wanted to convince someone, Simp Cop was already halfway there, and with the evidence in hand, she'd have had a far better shot at being taken seriously. Our hero calls saying he's tracked down 20 connected cases, and only one person ever escaped, a guy who finished off an innocent man right in front of his wife, and he's currently sitting on death row. And as screwed as our girl is at this point, finding an actual survivor feels like a true miracle. They visit the inmate, who reveals there have been several chains before this one. He discovered this demon goes after the witnesses to feed on their trauma. That's why they needed the man's wife to witness, so the curse would jump straight to her. So the only way out is finishing someone off in front of a witness, since the entity feeds on trauma delivered in the most brutal way possible. Confused and terrified with the new info, she starts digging through the files looking for some other option. Then she gets a visit from her childhood therapist, only to find out it's actually the entity. It scares the Prozac out of her, and says the harvest time is coming. Desperate, she heads to the hospital with a knife hidden up her sleeve, fully committed now to doing what the inmate told her in order to get rid of the monster. And after a scene bizarre enough that obviously I can't show it on YouTube, the poor doctor wakes up in her car and realizes it was all just a nightmare. Her boss happens to be walking by, tries to talk to her, and it's while running from him that Rose has an epiphany and decides the best move right now is to isolate herself completely, so the creature can't latch onto anyone else. Alright, survivors, I've got to be honest with you. Rose's plan here is actually pretty close to mine, except mine is what you'd call cold and calculated, since it requires making someone log out in front of another person so they can serve as the witness. And obviously, for the sake of my own conscience, I'd try to do society a favor and go looking for a couple of people with a serious history of violence and horrific crimes, which wouldn't be that hard since I've got a lovesick cop helping me out. So the plan would be locking those two up somewhere abandoned with enough food and water for 7 days, finishing one of them off, and leaving the other one there alone until the entity shows up to collect. Yeah, it's harsh, it's cold, it's calculated, but this is a how to survive video, not a how to survive and be politically correct one. Arriving at her old house, Rose walks to her mother's room, remembering how right before departing she begged her to get help, and little Rose refused, letting her log out instead. She finds an old lantern and fuel, seals every door and window shut, and waits for the thing. She hears crying from her mother's room and comes face to face with her own trauma, her mother apologizing and asking why her daughter didn't save her. Rose explains she was terrified of her, just a kid facing a monster, and asks why the entity chose her. It reveals her mind was such an easy target, given how much trauma she's carrying. Rose finally finds the courage to fight back using the old lantern to strike the creature and set both the monster and the house on fire, walking out and leaving her trauma to burn right along with it. Rose finds Simp Cop and finally admits she's been keeping people at a distance out of fear they'd see how broken she is, but getting close to him made that distance shrink, and that scared her enough to end things. She asks to crash there, and he enters full Joker mode, and she realizes it's the entity again in bolts. Except the moment she steps outside, she realizes she never actually left her mother's house. She sees the real cop approaching and locks herself back inside so he doesn't get cursed too. The creature reveals its true form and slides into Rose's body. Our hero breaks the door down and finds her standing there, smiling, just in time to see the entity do its thing and keep the cycle rolling. So based on everything we know, there was never really a nice and easy way to end this. This demon feeds off trauma, which is why it always needs a witness present to see that smile when it devours someone's soul. Exactly what happened with these poor people. There's a small chance he didn't get traumatized enough, given the man's a detective, who's clearly seen his share of horrifying things, but judging by the look on his face, I doubt it. The thing is, unlike Rose, our dear cop could actually pull off that sordid plan I mentioned a lot more easily, and I'd imagine he's got the nerve to get his hands a little dirty in exchange for saving his own life and putting a stop to a silent supernatural killer. Another possible way to solve this would be tracking down a demon expert, a priest, somebody who might actually know a ritual, since a creature that's been latching onto people and feeding off their negative emotions for ages has surely left some kind of lore trail somewhere, and there's probably at least a legend or two out there about how to defeat it, or at least protect yourself from it. That's the way I found to survive the Smile entity. If you came up with something different, let me know in the comments. Let's trade survival tactics. That way if some hell spawn actually shows up, we'll at least have a fighting chance. Thanks for watching, and see you later.